The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the recovery room as I slowly opened my eyes. The surgery was over, but the nightmare was just beginning. My throat was dry, my body ached, and the empty chair beside my bed spoke volumes. Where was Mark? A nurse noticed I was awake and smiled sympathetically. "Your husband had to step out," she said, avoiding my gaze. "There was an emergency with a friend?" I knew then, even before I saw the familiar red scarf draped over the back of that empty chair. Sophia. Of course it was Sophia. I had almost died on the operating table, my heart stopping for a full minute, but Mark had run to her instead of staying by my side. As I lay there, tubes snaking from my arms, I realized that perhaps I had lost more than just a kidney during the surgery. I had lost the illusion of being the most important person in my husband's life. The nurse busied herself checking my vitals, unaware of the irony. My body was healing, but my marriage was flatlining, and there wasn't a doctor in the world who could resuscitate it. Let me tell you how it all started. It was a Tuesday, like any other. The autumn sun filtered through the blinds of my office, casting long shadows across the stacks of papers on my desk. I absently rubbed my lower back, wincing at the now familiar twinge of pain as I leaned forward to make another note on a student's essay. "Just stress," I told myself for the 100th time. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a reminder. Doctor's appointment at 2 p.m. I'd almost forgotten about the follow-up for those persistent back pains. Probably nothing, I'd told Mark last week when he'd suggested I get checked out. Now, gathering my notes and sliding them into my worn leather satchel, I felt a twinge of annoyance at the interruption to my routine. As I locked up my office, I bumped into Sophia, Mark's research assistant. Her bright smile and the stack of books in her arms reminded me of myself at her age, eager, ambitious, full of promise. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Winters. Is Dr. Winters in his office? I have some data he asked for." I shook my head, trying to ignore the slight pang I felt at her use of Mark's title. When had I stopped being Emily and become Mrs. Winters to the younger staff? "He's teaching until 4, I believe, but you can leave it on his desk." Sophia's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, okay, it's just, well, we were supposed to go over it together. The grant deadline is coming up and—" I forced a smile, cutting her off gently. "I'm sure he'll call you when he's free. He's been working very hard on this project." As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia knew more about my husband's schedule than I did these days. The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. The doctor's office was cool and sterile, the fake plants in the corner a half-hearted attempt at comfort. I sat in the waiting room, flipping through an outdated magazine without really seeing the pages. My mind wandered to the stack of essays waiting to be graded, the dinner I needed to prepare, the faculty meeting tomorrow morning. It wasn't until a nurse called my name that I realized my hands were shaking slightly. Dr. Patel's face was grave as he gestured for me to sit. The chair felt too small suddenly, the room too warm. "Mrs. Winters, I'm afraid I have some concerning news about your test results." The words washed over me like ice water. Kidney failure. Immediate treatment required. Possible transplant needed. Each phrase hit like a physical blow, my mind struggling to process the information. I heard myself asking questions, my voice sounding distant and unfamiliar. How long have I had this? What are the next steps? Should I call my husband? Dr. Patel's voice was gentle but firm. "We caught it relatively early, but we need to act quickly. I'd like to schedule you for surgery as soon as possible to remove the damaged kidney. And yes, I think it would be a good idea to have your husband here for our next discussion about treatment options." I nodded numbly, my hand already reaching for my phone. 3 rings, then Mark's voicemail. "Hey, it's me. Can you come to Dr. Patel's office? It's important." My voice cracked on the last word, the reality of the situation finally starting to sink in. As I left the doctor's office, the world seemed altered, as if I was seeing it through a distorted lens. The same trees I'd walked past on my way in now looked ominous, their shadows stretching towards me like grasping fingers. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia asking if we were still on for dinner Friday. I stared at her name on the screen, remembering how Mark's eyes had lit up when he'd suggested inviting her. "She's brilliant," he'd said. "You two will get along great." I put the phone away without responding, the thought of dinner parties suddenly absurd in the face of my diagnosis. As I reached my car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I looked the same brown hair, streaked with the first strands of gray, same green eyes, same lines at the corners of my mouth. But everything had changed. The woman who had walked into that office worrying about lesson plans no longer existed. In her place stood someone facing a battle for her life, unsure if she was strong enough to fight it. The drive home was a blur of autumn colors and racing thoughts. I found myself sitting in our driveway, key still in the ignition, staring at the house Mark and I had bought with such hope 5 years ago. The flower beds I'd planted last spring burst with color, oblivious to the turmoil of their caretaker. How quickly life could shift, I thought. This morning, my biggest concern had been finishing my lecture. Now, I wasn't sure if I'd be alive to deliver it. I finally made my way inside, the house eerily quiet. Mark's jacket wasn't on its usual hook, his keys absent from the bowl by the door. He still hadn't called back. I sank onto the couch, my body feeling heavy and foreign. Son! The ticking of the clock on the mantel seemed to grow louder, marking the passage of time in this new, uncertain world I'd been thrust into. Just then I heard the front door open. Mark's voice called out, "Emily, are you home?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came out. How do you tell your husband that your life, both of your lives, was about to change forever? Mark appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed with concern. "Emily, what's wrong? I got your message, but I was in a meeting and couldn't step out." I looked up at him, this man I'd loved for so long, and felt a sudden, irrational surge of anger. Where had he been when I needed him most? But as quickly as it came, the anger faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. "Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to sit down. We need to talk." As I began to explain, watching the color drain from Mark's face, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Our life together, once so solid and certain, now felt as fragile as my newly diagnosed health. And as Mark pulled me into his arms, murmuring words of comfort and support, a small part of me wondered if we were strong enough to weather this storm. Little did I know, the true test of our marriage was yet to come. The next day, Mark was at the doc's office to discuss treatment options. As we left the office, I could feel him around me. The weight of Mark's arm across my shoulder should have been comforting as we left Dr. Patel's office a week later, our heads spinning with treatment plans and surgical risks. Instead, I found myself hyper-aware of the distance between us, a chasm that had been growing long before my diagnosis. As we walked to the car, my mind drifted back to the day we first met, 12 years ago. I was a nervous first-year professor, and Mark was the charming department head who took me under his wing. I remember the way he leaned against my office door frame, a roguish smile playing on his lips as he invited me to the faculty mixer. "Don't worry," he'd said, noticing my hesitation. "I'll be your personal tour guide through the shark-infested waters of academia." I'd laughed then, charmed by his easy confidence and the way his blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. That night at the mixer, as he introduced me to colleague after colleague, his hand had remained a steady presence on the small of my back. It felt like protection, like promise. Now, as we reached the car, Mark's hand fell away from my shoulder, leaving me feeling oddly bereft. He opened my door, then paused, fishing his phone out of his pocket with a frown. "Everything okay?" "It's Sophia. She's asking about the conference presentation. I should probably call her back." I nodded, sliding into the passenger seat. Of course it was Sophia. It was always Sophia these days. I watched as Mark paced beside the car, his animated voice drifting through the open window as he explained my situation to his assistant. My situation? As if my failing kidney was a minor inconvenience, like a flat tire or a missed deadline. As Mark talked, I found myself remembering the night he'd told me about hiring Sophia. We were celebrating our 10th anniversary at the same restaurant where he'd proposed. Mark had been distracted all evening, checking his phone more often than usual. "I've found the perfect research assistant," he'd said, his face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. "She's brilliant, Emily. Just graduated top of her class at MIT. I think she could really help push our project to the next level." I'd smiled and raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I'd said, trying to ignore the hint of unease in my stomach. I should have been happy for him. excited about the project that had consumed so much of his time and passion. Instead, I found myself wondering when I had stopped being enough. The memory faded as Mark slid into the driver's seat, ending his call with a sigh. "Sophia sends her best. She's really worried about you." I turned to look out the window, watching the hospital shrink in the side mirror. "That's kind of her," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I wanted to ask why Sophia was so concerned, why Mark felt the need to share the intimate details of my health with his assistant. Instead, I found myself saying, "We should have her over for dinner soon, to thank her for her support." Mark's hand found mine across the center console, giving it a brief squeeze. "That's a great idea. I knew you two would get along." As we drove home, I thought about the decision I'd made early in our marriage to always support Mark's career, to be the understanding wife who didn't complain about late nights at the office or working weekends. I told myself it was temporary, that once he achieved tenure, things would calm down. But tenure had come and gone, and still, Mark's work consumed him. Now, facing a health crisis I never saw coming, I wondered if I had made the right choice. Had my unwavering support allowed Mark to take me for granted? Had I become so good at being understanding that he no longer saw me as a priority? We pulled into our driveway, and I noticed Sophia's red scarf hanging from our mailbox. Mark followed my gaze and chuckled. She must have dropped it off earlier. I told her I'd look over some notes for her. I nodded, suddenly too tired to respond. As we walked to the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia's scarf was more than just a forgotten accessory. It was a flag planted on our territory, a silent declaration of her growing presence in our lives. Mark unlocked the door, ushering me inside with a gentle hand on my back. The gesture, once so comforting, now felt like an echo of a past I wasn't sure we could reclaim. As I watched him retrieve Sophia's scarf, carefully folding it before placing it on the entryway table, I realized that my upcoming surgery wasn't just a fight for my health. It was a fight for my marriage, for the life we had built together. And as Mark's phone buzzed again, Sophia's name lighting up the screen, I wasn't sure if it was a battle I had the strength to win. The ticking of the clock on my bedside table seemed impossibly loud in the pre-dawn quiet of our bedroom. 5:47 a.m. In just over an hour, Mark and I would leave for the hospital, where Dr. Patel and his team would remove my failing kidney. I hadn't slept, my mind a carousel of worst-case scenarios and unspoken fears. Beside me, Mark slept soundly, his breathing deep and even. I envied his ability to find peace, to shut out the world and its worries. Carefully, so as not to wake him, I slipped out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. My hands moved on autopilot, measuring coffee grounds and filling the pot with water. The routine was comforting in its familiarity, a small piece of normalcy to cling to. As the coffee brewed, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma, I found myself drawn to the living room. My eyes fell on the mantel, where a collection of framed photos chronicled our life together. Mark and me on our wedding day, both of us beaming at the camera. Us in front of the Eiffel Tower on our honeymoon, my head resting on his shoulder. A more recent photo from last year's department Christmas party, Mark's arm around my waist as we stood with a group of colleagues. And there, at the edge of the frame, was Sophia, her smile bright as she looked not at the camera, but at Mark. I picked up the frame, my fingers tracing the outline of our faces. When had things started to change? When had Mark's touch started to feel more like habit than desire? I tried to pinpoint the moment, to identify the exact second when our marriage began to fray at the edges, but it was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. The coffee maker beeped, startling me from my reverie. I set the photo back on the mantel and returned to the kitchen, pouring myself a cup. The first sip burned my tongue, but I welcomed the pain. It was real, tangible, unlike the nebulous ache in my chest. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard Mark stirring. A few minutes later, he appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair mussed from sleep, his eyes still heavy-lidded. "You're up early," I shrugged, offering a small smile. Couldn't sleep. Mark crossed the room, wrapping his arms around me from behind. His chin rested on my shoulder, and for a moment I allowed myself to lean into his embrace, to pretend that nothing had changed. "It's going to be okay," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Dr. Patel is the best. You're in good hands." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to believe him, to take comfort in his words. but a part of me wondered if he was trying to convince himself as much as me. As Mark moved away to pour his own coffee, my eyes fell on the fruit bowl on the counter. Nestled among the apples and bananas was a small, smooth stone, its surface painted with the word hope in delicate script. Sophia had given it to me the day after my diagnosis, her eyes wide with sincerity as she pressed it into my hand. "It's a worry stone," she'd explained. "You hold it when you're anxious, and it's supposed to absorb your negative energy." I thought it might help. I'd thanked her, touched by the gesture despite the complicated feelings Sophia's presence stirred in me. Now, I found myself reaching for the stone, its cool surface a stark contrast to the warmth of my coffee mug. I ran my thumb over the painted word, wondering if hope was enough to get us through what lay ahead. "We should get ready," Mark said, glancing at the clock. "We don't want to be late." I nodded, setting down my mug and the stone. As I turned to head back to our bedroom, I caught sight of Mark picking up the worry stone, turning it over in his hand with a small smile. The gesture, innocent as it was, sent a pang through my chest. Even now, on the morning of my surgery, Sophia's influence was present. In our room, I dressed slowly, my movements deliberate as I put on the comfortable clothes I'd laid out the night before. Mark bustled around, double-checking that we had everything we needed: insurance cards, Idaho, the folder of medical information Dr. Patel had given us. As I zipped up my jacket, my hand brushed against something in the pocket. I pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Opening it, I recognized Mark's handwriting. "Emily, my love, you are the strongest person I know. We'll get through this together. Always, M." I stared at the note, a lump forming in my throat. When had he slipped this into my pocket? The Mark who wrote this note felt miles away from the man who had been so distracted lately, so consumed by work and other things. "Ready?" Mark asked, appearing in the doorway with our bags. I nodded, carefully refolding the note and returning it to my pocket. As we left the house, the rising sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I found myself clinging to the words on that small piece of paper. "We'll get through this together." I only hoped it was a promise Mark could keep. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. The heart monitor's beeping increased slightly, betraying my emotional turmoil. The nurse patted my hand gently, misinterpreting my distress as physical discomfort. "I'll see if we can get you something for the pain," she said softly before stepping out of the room. Left alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help but remember the last time I'd been in a hospital bed. 5 years ago after a minor car accident. Mark had been there when I woke up then, his face the first thing I saw, his hand holding mine. He'd stayed by my side for hours, reading to me from my favorite book, making me laugh despite the pain. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's life now. How had we drifted so far apart that he could leave me here, alone, after major surgery? And for Sophia, of all people? My thoughts were interrupted by Dr. Patel's arrival. His familiar face was a welcome sight, grounding me in the present moment. "Mrs. Winters, it's good to see you awake," he said, his voice warm but professional. The surgery went very well. We were able to remove the damaged kidney without any complications. I nodded, grateful for the good news, but still feeling a hollowness that had nothing to do with my missing organ. "Where's my husband?" I managed to croak out, my voice still rough from the intubation. Dr. Patel's expression flickered for a moment, a mix of concern and something else, disapproval perhaps, crossing his features before he schooled them back into a neutral mask. "He stepped out to handle an urgent matter," Dr. Patel said carefully. "But let's focus on you for now. How are you feeling?" As Dr. Patel continued to explain the details of my recovery, my eyes kept drifting to Sophia's scarf. Its vibrant red seemed to mock me, a stark contrast to the sterile whites and blues of the hospital room. It was as if Sophia herself was here, an invisible presence standing between Mark and me. Just as Dr. Patel was finishing up, the door opened and Mark rushed in. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and there was a wild look in his eyes that I'd never seen before. "Emily," he breathed, relief evident in his voice as he came to my bedside. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here when you woke up. There was an emergency with Sophia," I finished for him, my voice flat. "I know," Mark faltered, his eyes darting to the red scarf and then back to me. It's not what you think. She had a panic attack. I was the only one she could reach." Dr. Patel cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the room. "I'll leave you two to talk. Mrs. Winters, remember what we discussed about rest and recovery. I'll be back to check on you later." As the door closed behind Dr. Patel, silence fell over the room. Mark stood there, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking like he wanted to say something but didn't know how to begin. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. The physical toll of the surgery combined with the emotional weight of Mark's absence left me feeling drained. "Emily, Mark started, but I cut him off. "Not now, Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't do this right now." I heard him sigh, felt the brush of his lips against my forehead. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." But as I drifted off into a restless sleep, Sophia's scarf still visible through my half-closed eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that here meant something very different to Mark than it did to me. The days following my surgery passed in a haze of pain medication, fitful sleep, and stilted conversations with Mark. He was present physically, sitting in that chair beside my bed, but his mind seemed elsewhere. I'd catch him checking his phone frequently, his brow furrowing as he read messages I knew weren't from me. On the third day post-surgery, I was finally cleared to go home. As Mark helped me into a wheelchair, I couldn't help but think about how different this homecoming was from what I'd imagined. I'd pictured us closer, united by the experience. Instead, I felt more distant from him than ever. At home, Mark busied himself setting up a makeshift bedroom on the first floor so I wouldn't have to navigate the stairs. As I watched him fuss over pillows and blankets, a memory surfaced, sharp and bittersweet. It was our first apartment together, a tiny studio with barely enough room for a bed and a desk. We'd spent the whole day moving in, and I was exhausted. Mark had insisted on making the bed himself, determined to create a perfect nest for us. "There," he'd said, standing back to admire his handiwork. "Our first real home together." I'd laughed, pulling him down onto the freshly made bed. "Home is wherever I'm with you," I'd told him, and he'd kissed me like he never wanted to stop. Now, watching Mark arrange things with clinical efficiency, I wondered what had happened to that couple. When had we stopped being each other's home? "Is this okay?" Mark asked, interrupting my reverie. "Do you need anything else?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "It's fine, thank you." Mark nodded, then glanced at his watch. "I have to run to the office for a bit. Will you be all right on your own?" The old me would have assured him I'd be fine, encouraged him to go. But something in me rebelled against falling back into that pattern. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'd rather you stayed, just for today. Please?" Mark's expression flickered, a mix of surprise and something that looked almost like guilt. "Of course," he said after a moment. "Of course I'll stay. Let me just make a quick call." As he stepped out of the room, phone in hand, I sank back against the pillows, closing my eyes against the sting of tears. I knew who he was calling. I could picture Sophia on the other end, her voice soft and understanding as Mark explained he couldn't come in. Would she offer to handle things for him? Would she tell him not to worry, that she had everything under control? When Mark returned, he was smiling, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "All taken care of," he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "What would you like to do? We could watch a movie, or I could read to you, if you'd prefer." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with. But then his phone buzzed, and though he didn't check it, I saw his fingers twitch, as if fighting the urge to reach for it. "A movie would be nice," I said softly. As Mark set up the laptop, I found my gaze drawn to the window. Outside, the sky was a brilliant blue, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. It was a beautiful day, the kind we used to spend having picnics in the park or taking long walks around the neighborhood. Now, I was trapped inside, my body weak and aching, while my marriage seemed to be slipping through my fingers like sand. The sunlight streaming through the window felt like it belonged to another world, one where I wasn't sick, where Mark and I were still the couple we used to be. The movie started, some lightweight comedy neither of us was really watching. Mark's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with my own. It should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this gesture, like so much between us lately, was more habit than genuine connection. As the characters on screen stumbled through their predictable romantic misunderstandings, I found myself studying Mark's profile. The lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we met, the touch of gray at his temples that I usually found distinguished but now just reminded me of how much time had passed, how much we'd changed. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed by a wave of longing, not just for the Mark of our early days, but for the Emily I used to be. The woman who felt secure in her husband's love, who didn't lie awake at night wondering if she was enough. I must have made a sound because Mark turned to me, concern etched on his face. "Are you in pain? Should I call the doctor?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. How could I explain that the pain I felt had nothing to do with my incision and everything to do with the growing distance between us? Mark squeezed my hand, his eyes searching my face. For a moment, I thought he might say something, might finally address the elephant in the room. But then his phone buzzed again, and the moment was gone. As Mark excused himself to take the call, "It'll just be a minute, I promise," I turned my gaze back to the window. A red cardinal had landed on the branch of the oak tree in our yard, its bright plumage a stark contrast to the green leaves. As I watched, it spread its wings and took flight, soaring up into that impossibly blue sky. I pressed my hand against the cool glass, feeling suddenly, achingly alone. The cardinal's flight felt like a metaphor for everything I'd lost, my health, my sense of security, and now, it seemed, my marriage. As the bird disappeared from view, I let my hand fall back to my lap, where it landed on something small and hard. Sophia's worry stone. I must have absent-mindedly put it in my pocket before leaving for the hospital. I ran my thumb over the painted word hope and felt a lump form in my throat. Hope. What a cruel, beautiful thing to cling to when everything else was falling apart. As the days passed, I found myself spending more and more time alone in the makeshift bedroom. Mark's visits became shorter and less frequent, always punctuated by the buzz of his phone or a hurried explanation about work commitments. The solitude gave me too much time to think, to replay every interaction, searching for clues I might have missed. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after my surgery, I was attempting to sort through a stack of get-well cards when I heard the front door open. Expecting Mark, I straightened up, trying to look more put together than I felt, but it wasn't Mark's voice that called out a hesitant hello. It was Sophia's. My heart rate spiked, the sudden rush of adrenaline making me feel lightheaded. I heard her footsteps approaching, accompanied by the rustle of what sounded like shopping bags. "Emily?" Sophia's voice was closer now, just outside the door. "Are you awake? I brought some groceries and thought I could make you lunch." For a moment, I considered pretending to be asleep, but the thought of Sophia moving around my house, acting as if she belonged here, spurred me into action. "Come in," I called, my voice steadier than I expected. Sophia entered, her arms laden with bags. She looked exactly as I remembered, young, beautiful, effortlessly put together even in casual clothes. The sight of her made my chest tighten with an emotion I didn't want to name. "Hi," she said, her smile bright but slightly uncertain. "Mark mentioned you might need some help around the house. I hope you don't mind me dropping by." Of course Mark had mentioned that. Of course he'd sent Sophia to do what he should have been doing himself. I forced a smile, gesturing for her to set the bags down. "That's very thoughtful of you," I managed. Sophia began unpacking the groceries, chattering about the organic market where she'd found the perfect ingredients for a healing soup her grandmother used to make. I watched her move around the room with easy familiarity, and suddenly I couldn't bear it anymore. "Sophia," I interrupted, "why are you really here?" She paused, a bunch of kale suspended midair. "I told you, I wanted to help." "No," I said, more firmly this time. "Why are you here? In my house, in my life, in my marriage?" The kale dropped to the counter with a soft thud. Sophia turned to face me, her expression a mix of shock and something that looked almost like guilt. "Emily, I don't know what you mean. Mark and I are just colleagues, friends." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised even me. Friends? Is that what you call it? Friends who text constantly, who have inside jokes I'm not part of, friends who rush to each other's side at a moment's notice, even when there are more important things, more important people to attend to? Sophia's face paled. He told you about the panic attack? Emily, I swear it wasn't. I didn't mean to pull him away from you. I didn't have anyone else to call. And that's the problem, isn't it? I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. You shouldn't have him to call. Not like that. Not when I'm lying in a hospital bed, scared and alone. Sophia took a step towards me, her hand outstretched as if to offer comfort, but I held up a hand to stop her. I want to understand, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. I want to understand what's happening here, because from where I'm sitting, it looks an awful lot like my husband is falling in love with someone else. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. Sophia's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something, recognition, regret, cross her face. Emily, no, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's not like that. We work well together. We understand each other. But Mark loves you. He talks about you all the time. Does he? I asked, genuinely curious. What does he say? Sophia hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw the truth she was trying to hide. He says you're brilliant, that you're the strongest person he knows, that he doesn't know what he'd do without you. I nodded slowly, absorbing her words. And yet, when I needed him most, he was with you. Sophia flinched as if I'd slapped her. That was my fault, she said quickly. I shouldn't have called him. I know that now. I'll step back. I'll find another lab to work in. I never meant to come between you. Her offer should have made me feel better. Should have been exactly what I wanted to hear. Instead, it left me feeling hollow, because even if Sophia disappeared tomorrow, it wouldn't change the fact that Mark had chosen to be with her when I needed him most. It's not that simple, I said, feeling suddenly exhausted. You can't just step back and erase what's happened. The problem isn't just your presence in our lives, Sophia. It's the absence I felt in my marriage long before you came along. Sophia sank into the chair beside my bed, her composure finally cracking. I'm so sorry, Emily. I never wanted this. I respect you so much. And Mark adores you. Whatever you think is happening, I promise it's not. Don't, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Please don't make promises you can't keep, and don't make excuses for Mark. He's a grown man who made his own choices. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken truths hanging heavy between us. Finally, Sophia stood, gathering her things. I should go, she said softly. I'm sorry for everything. As she reached the door, I called out, Sophia? She turned, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thank you, I said, surprising myself, for being honest, and for the groceries. Sophia nodded, a sad smile flickering across her face. Then, she was gone, leaving me alone with the lingering scent of her perfume and 1,000 unanswered questions. I sank back against my pillows, emotionally drained. The confrontation with Sophia had revealed more than I'd anticipated, but instead of clarity, I felt more confused than ever. Because beneath Sophia's guilt and protestations, I'd seen something else, a genuine affection for Mark that mirrored my own. As the afternoon light faded, casting long shadows across the room, I found myself staring at the framed photo on my nightstand. Mark and me on our wedding day, both of us radiating joy and hope for the future. I traced the outline of our smiling faces, wondering how we'd gone from that blissful couple to this. The sound of a key in the lock startled me from my reverie. Mark was home, and for the first time since my surgery, I felt a spark of something other than sadness or resignation. I felt ready to confront the truth, whatever it might be. As Mark's footsteps approached, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead, because one thing had become crystal clear during my talk with Sophia. Things couldn't continue as they were. Something had to change. And as the bedroom door swung open, revealing Mark's tired face, I realized that change would have to start with me. Mark's eyes widened as he entered the room, taking in the groceries on the counter and the lingering tension in the air. "Emily, is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Sophia was here," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "We had an interesting conversation." Mark's face paled, his hand tightening on the doorframe. "Sophia was here? Why didn't she tell me?" "Maybe for the same reason you didn't tell me you were sending her," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Mark, we need to talk. Really talk." He nodded slowly, moving to sit in the chair beside my bed, the same chair where Sophia had sat just hours before. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I know things have been difficult," Mark began, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "With your surgery and the project deadline looming—" "This isn't about the surgery or your project," I interrupted gently. "This is about us, Mark, about what's happening to our marriage." Mark's head snapped up, surprise and a hint of fear in his eyes. "What do you mean? Nothing's happening to our marriage. We're just going through a rough patch. Once you're better—" "Once I'm better, what?" I asked. "We'll go back to how things were." "Mark, how things were wasn't working. Even before I got sick, we were drifting apart. Can you honestly tell me you haven't felt it too?" He was silent for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to see it. I thought if I just worked harder, achieved more, I could fix whatever was wrong." "And Sophia?" I asked, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. "Where does she fit into all this?" Mark flinched, guilt flashing across his face. "Sophia she's just a colleague, a friend. Nothing more." "But you want her to be," I said softly. It wasn't a question. The silence that followed was answer enough. I closed my eyes, feeling a strange mix of pain and relief wash over me. At least now the truth was out in the open. "Emily, I never meant for any of this to happen," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you. I've always loved you." "I know," I replied, opening my eyes to meet his gaze. "And I love you too. But sometimes, love isn't enough." Mark reached for my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I let him take it. His touch, once so familiar and comforting, now felt like a bittersweet reminder of what we were losing. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew I had to say. I think we need some time apart." Mark's hand tightened on mine. "Apart? Emily, no. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll quit the project, anything, just please don't give up on us." The desperation in his voice made my heart ache, but I held firm. "I'm not giving up, Mark. I'm choosing myself. For the first time in a long time, I'm putting my needs first. And right now, what I need is space to heal, not just physically, but emotionally." Tears welled up in Mark's eyes, and I felt my own vision blur. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I'll stay with my sister for a while," I said, the plan forming as I spoke. "Just until I'm strong enough to be on my own. You can stay here, finish your project." "And after that?" Mark's voice was barely audible. I shook my head. "I don't know. I can't think that far ahead right now. All I know is that we can't keep going like this. It's not fair to either of us." Mark nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I never wanted to hurt you, Emily. You have to believe that." "I do," I said softly, "but sometimes we hurt the people we love without meaning to. The important thing is what we do next." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of our shared history and the uncertainty of our future filling the room. Finally, Mark stood up, moving as if every movement caused him pain. I'll call your sister," he said quietly. "Make the arrangements." I nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and relief wash over me. As Mark reached the door, I called out, "Mark?" He turned, his eyes red-rimmed and weary. "Thank you," I said, "for not fighting me on this, for respecting my decision." A sad smile flickered across his face. "You've always been the stronger one," he said softly. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the enormity of what had just transpired. I sank back against my pillows, emotionally drained. The confrontation with Mark had been painful, but beneath the hurt, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Not for our marriage, perhaps, but for myself. As the evening light faded, casting long shadows across the room, I found myself drawn to the window. With effort, I rose from the bed, my steps slow and unsteady as I made my way across the room. The view outside was familiar. Our backyard, the old oak tree, the flower beds I'd planted with such care. But somehow it all looked different now, as if I was seeing it through new eyes. A movement caught my attention, and I spotted the cardinal I'd seen days before. It landed on a branch of the oak tree, its red feathers a vibrant splash of color against the deepening twilight. As I watched, it began to sing, its clear, sweet notes piercing the quiet of the evening. Tears welled up in my eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of release, of acceptance. I placed my hand against the cool glass of the window, feeling the vibrations of the cardinal's song through my palm. In that moment, I realized that this quiet strength, this ability to face hard truths and make difficult choices, was my dignity. It wasn't about maintaining a facade or pretending everything was fine. It was about honoring myself, my needs, my worth. The cost of this dignity was high. I was losing the life I'd built, the future I'd planned. But as I stood there, watching the cardinal sing its heart out as the day faded into night, I knew I was gaining something far more valuable myself. I don't know how long I stood there, one hand pressed against the window, the other clutching Sophia's worry stone. As darkness fell and the cardinal's song faded away, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same strength and grace that had brought me to this moment. Slowly, I made my way back to bed, my body tired but my spirit lighter than it had been in months. As I settled under the covers, my hand brushed against the folded note Mark had left in my jacket pocket the day of my surgery. "We'll get through this together," it had said. I smiled softly, a bittersweet ache in my chest. We hadn't gotten through it together, not in the way we'd imagined, but we had gotten through it. And now, as I closed my eyes and let sleep claim me, I felt ready to face whatever the new day might bring. In my dreams that night, I soared with the cardinal, free and unafraid, into a sky full of possibilities.